Hi, I'm Don Smith with VADA Safety Training and Compliance. Today we're going to talk about pre-trip and post-trip inspections and the things that you need to do a proper pre-trip or post-trip inspection. First, we'll open the hood and check the engine compartment. When you open this hood, just don't let go of it now. Let it down nice and easy. If you're employed and work for somebody, it's hard to explain to your boss why you let the hood go and it broke the cable on the inside and came all the way down, busted out the grill on the bumper. First, we're going to check the key components as far as fluid levels. We're going to make sure that the fluid levels are in the operational range. Number one, the coolant level on the far side of the vehicle. Then we're going to check the power steering fluid to make sure it's in the operational range. We're going to check the oil right here to make sure it's in the operational range. Next, we're going to check the suspension to make sure that the mounts on the very front of the springs are secure. Then we're going to check the rear part of the suspension where it connects to the hangers. We're going to make sure the same is true, that's not bent or cracked or broken. There's no missing or damaged nuts, bolts, or parts. They're all secure. Then we're going to check the springs themselves to make sure they're not cracked, they're not broken, they're not shifted, and there's none missing. And we'll check the U-bolts and the nuts down below. We're going to check the U-bolts to make sure that they're not cracked or broken, and make sure the nuts are on below, all four of them. Make sure they are secure. There's no damage to the U-bolts themselves or the nuts. Then we're going to check to make sure that the shock absorber is secured to the frame of the tractor and to the springs or to the axle down below. Make sure it's secured and it's not leaking. Then we'll move out from the suspension. We'll move out to the steering linkage. Going to check to make sure the steering linkage all the way down, including the drive shaft coming down to the pitman arm, the drag link, all the way to the steering arm, just the whole linkage itself. There's nothing bent, there's nothing cracked, there's nothing broken, there's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or cotter pins. The cotter pins are in. Anywhere that there's a castle nut with a cotter pin, that's a key component. So number one, check to make sure that cotter pin is there. If it's not, the castle nut's going to back off, then you lose steering, and that's not good. Then we're going to check to make sure that there's no excessive wear in the joints. To do that, we're going to turn the shaft like this, and you can see if there's any excessive movement here. The movement from this output shaft from the steering gearbox should be connected to the pitman arm, and there shouldn't be any movement in here. It should be all firmly connected. So when this moves, the pitman arm moves, and the same is true when the pitman arm moves, the drag link moves, and there's no excessive wear in the ball joints here or any of the other ball joints throughout the linkage. In addition to the steering linkage, we'll check the steering gearbox to make sure it's securely connected. There's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts. They're all tight. They're not bent, cracked, or broken. There's no cracks in the steering gearbox itself. There's no leaks. Since this is power steering, these hoses take power steering fluid into the gearbox. So we're checking to make sure there's no leaks from the gearbox itself or the hoses. Making sure the clamps are on tight, the fittings are in good condition, they're not cracked, they're not broken, they're not leaking. There's no rubbing on other components, rubbing hoses in holes into the hoses. We're going to check that the brake line is secured on both ends. This is an air hose. Going to make sure it's secured on both ends. It's not cracked or damaged or broken. The line isn't leaking. There's no, it's not cut. It's not cracked. It's not rubbing on other components. There's no damage from rubbing on other components. Then we're going to check the brake chamber itself As you can tell in the front axle, this is just a service brake chamber. There's no emergency brake chamber. So we're just checking the brake chamber to make sure there's no holes in it, it's not cracked, it's not damaged, the clamp is secured, it's not leaking, there's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts, and it's all secure. Then we're going to check the slack adjuster. We're going to make sure that the slack adjuster is secure, there's no missing or damaged bolts or nuts or parts or pins in this case. This pin comes through the push arm, and there's a Carter pin on the very back of this main pin. Got to make sure all those Carter pins are in, or again, you lose brakes. The two things you can't lose, steering and brakes. So it's very important to catch all these things. You're going to make sure that the slack adjuster is adjusted, or the brake adjustment is adjusted to the manufacturer's specifications. From there, you're responsible to look at the brake shoes on the inside. The brake shoes on the inside should have no less than 1/4 of an inch of brake pad. It can't be cracked or broken, and it can't have any grease or oil in the brake pads. Then we're going to look at the brake drum. The brake drum here, and it's viewable from outside looking through the holes of the wheel. Going to make sure that the brake drum has no holes, there's no grooves, there's no cracks or damage, there's no grease or oil. And it's all secure, no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts. On the tire, we're going to check the sidewalls to make sure there's no abrasions, there's no bruises, there's no bulges, there's no cuts. We're going to check the face of the tire to make sure the same is true here, no abrasions, bruises, cuts, or bulges. There's no exposed cord. The minimum tread depth on the front tire is 4/32 in all major grooves, and it has to be flat. There can't be cupping going on. It has to be evenly worn. We're going to check the inflation with an air gauge to make sure it's inflated correctly. Next, we're going to move to the door and to the mirrors. We're going to make sure that the latch on the door works properly. It opens and closes easily. That might seem like a minor thing, but if you ever have an accident and you're on the side and rescue crews are there, you want to make sure this door opens and closes easily. We're going to check to make sure that the hinges are not bent, cracked, or broken. There's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts, and they are all secure. We're going to make sure that this seal is secure all the way around the door. Next, we're going to check our mirrors. We're going to make sure that the mirrors are not bent or cracked or broken. The brackets and the fittings not bent, cracked, or broken. There's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts. We're going to make sure that the mirror itself is clean, it's not cracked or damaged, and it's adjusted, although we'll check the adjustment from inside the cab. We're going to make sure all the sub mirrors and the turn signals are all secured to the mirror bracket itself. From there, we're going to check the battery box and the steps to make sure that the battery box cover is secured. There's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts or rivets in this case. The steps are secure, they're solid. They're going to hold the driver's weight when they get up onto the steps. They're clean, there's no grease or oil, snow, that sort of thing on the steps. Next, we'll check the exhaust system. In this particular case, we have dual stacks, so we'll check the other side just the same as we do this side. We're going to check to make sure there's no cracks, there's no holes. We're going to look at the clamps and the fittings, the mounting brackets to make sure they're all secure, they're not bent or cracked or broken, there's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts. There's no leaks, which would be indicated by a soot trail coming out. It's secured to the cab, nothing's going to fall off, and you're not going to have exhaust leaks going inside. From there, we're going to check our tanks. The DEF tank and the fuel tank will check exactly the same. You need to make sure they are secured to the tractor. There's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts on the straps. They are secured. The brackets to the frame is secured. There's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts there. the brackets and the mounts are not bent, cracked, or broken. We're going to check that the cap is on in both situations. We're going to check to make sure there's no leaks coming underneath the fuel tank or from the fuel lines. Next, we'll check the drop axle or the lift axle, however you want to term it. We're going to check the suspension on this axle the same as we did the very front, except for an airbag, and I'll discuss that when we discuss the airbag in the rear. I want to point out that there's a reflector here. You are responsible to make sure all the reflectors are secure, they're not cracked, they're not broken, and they're clean, yellow or amber to the front, red to the rear. Next, we'll check the rear suspension. We're going to check the rear suspension exactly the same as what we did up front, except that obviously the mounts to the springs are heavier on this case because it goes back to an airbag. I'll talk about the airbag in a moment, but we're going to check the mounts to make sure it's not cracked or broken, there's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts, it's secure. From there, we'll check the frame and cross members. We're going to check the frame all the way down on both sides to make sure it's not bent, cracked, or broken. The cross members the same way, not bent, cracked, or broken. There's no illegal welds. There's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts like these knee braces. They're all secure. They're all tight, no loose nuts or bolts. Then we're going to check the torsion or torque arm, or however you want to term this component right here, to make sure it's secure, no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts. It's not bent, cracked, or broken. The bushing is there and it's secured on both sides. The bushing part holds true with the front suspension on the front mount and on the hanger also. There's bushings in each one of those holes. You have to make sure that the bushings are there and they're secure. Next, we're going to check the drive line. The drive line going down all the way through here. We're going to make sure it's not bent, cracked, broken, or twisted. We're going to make sure that it's secure and there's no foreign debris wrapped around the drive line or at the couplings. This is a new truck, so there's no deck plate between here, but if we have the bunks on the truck, it's going to be back at this position, and in between the bunks and the cab, there's going to be a deck plate. You want to make sure that the deck plate is solid all the way through. It's secure, there's no debris on the deck plate, and it's clean, there's no oil or grease on it. It has to be solid so the driver doesn't step on it and acts like a diving board. No missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts, and it is secure. Next, on the suspension, we're going to check the rear part. We're going to check to make sure that the airbag is secure. There's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts on the bottom, on the top or the bottom. Make sure that the airbag is inflated, it's not leaking, and it's not rubbing on other components, or there's no damage from rubbing on other components, such as tire chains coming through and hitting the edge of the airbags, making sure it's in good condition. From there, we're going to check our tires. We're going to check the rear tires the same as we did up front, such as the inflation and the sidewalls and evenly worn. The only difference is we're going to check to make sure there's no less than 2/32 in all major grooves, and there's no debris lodged between the duals, or they're not rubbing. If they were rubbing, that would indicate a flat tire. Next, let's check the rims the same way as we did up front, except the seals here are just a little bit different. There's no axle seal that you can see the level of the oil. So you just have to mainly check to see if there's any leaks at the seal here. But remember, you still have to check the inside as well as the outside. And that's easy to do. When you walk along your vehicle doing your inspection, just look down at the other side, at the duals, the inside of the duals on the other side of the vehicle. And you'll see if there's a leak coming down from there. Then when you go to the other side of the vehicle, look at this dual from the other side looking at the inside. Very easy to do. You just have to do it. When you check the inflation on these tires, you see guys thumping them all the time. And that's good to do, but check with an air gauge also. The thumping method is a quick and easy way. Just don't kick it with your foot, but thump it with a hammer or device to make sure you have air pressure. But as I indicated, if the casings are different, this is a Bridgestone, if you happen to have a Goodyear on the inside, the thump is going to have a different sound. So make sure you check with an air gauge also. Next, let's check the mud flaps. We have to make sure the mud flaps are secured to the frame. There's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts on the inside, or the flaps to the frame. No missing or damaged nuts or bolts, and they're all secure. Make sure that the mud flaps hang at least halfway down on the center of the tire. They have to hang at least that far down. Can't be ripped, can't be torn, can't have holes in it, has to be secure. Next, we'll move to the rear and we're going to check the lights. When you do this inspection, you have to check the lights on the tractor, the trailer, everything. Make sure that the tail lights are working, left signal, right signal, tractor, trailer, they're working, the four-ways are working, and the brake lights are working. A lot of times I have guys say that I just check my brake lights by putting my foot on the brake and seeing the reflection on the ground. And that's great, unless you have 4 brake lights and one of them's out. So the way to do that is from the cab, put something on that service brake applicator, or the Johnson bar as they call it, to hold it down, and then come back and check your brake lights and make sure they all work. The same holds true with the front. We're going to check the headlights, both bright and dim, left signal, right signal, 4-ways, then all the cab lights and the clearance lights alongside the tractor and the trailer. Working from the trailer back, we're going to check the pintle hook to make sure that the pintle hook is secure. The mounting bolts are there and there are no missing or nuts or bolts. They're all secure. It's not bent, cracked, or broken. There's no excessive wear around the hook. And the D-ring coming out from the stinger, the D-ring has to be secured to the trailer, and there's no excessive wear in the D-ring. The safety latch, it has to be working, has to be down and secured if you're hauling your trailer. Next, when you have a trailer connected to your tractor, make sure that the air lines are secured on both sides in the appropriate area, the service line and the emergency line in the appropriate sides. Make sure there's no leaks in the air lines. Make sure the air lines themselves aren't cut, they're not cracked, they're not crimped, they're not taped. An inspector is going to look for tape around an airline because that indicates that you're trying to fix a leak, and it's just a quick down and dirty fix, and that's not appropriate. So they're going to look for all those things. Make sure it's secured on both ends of the trailer and on the tractor, or the truck in this case. We're going to check the light cord, make sure it's secured on both ends. Make sure that it is not crimped or cracked or cut. There's no exposed wires, there's no broken wires, there's no burnt wires, it's all secure. The rest of the trailer, inspect the same way as you did the tractor, from the reach all the way back to the suspension and the frame in the back. Make sure there's no bends, there's no cracks, there's no breaks, no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts. It's all secure. This is the inside of a brand new Kenworth tractor that our friends at Kenworth Northwest in Lakewood, Washington allowed us to use. It's a beautiful truck. I wish I was fortunate enough to drive one of these. But we'll do the inside of the inspection on a new truck just like we would an old truck. Start off with the pedals to make sure they move freely. There's no missing or damaged nuts or bolts or parts on any of the components. There's no unusual noises, and they move freely without binding. Next, we'll go up and make sure that the horn works. And then we'll go from there, making sure that the windshield is clean, it's not cracked or damaged or chipped. There's no obstructions like books or garbage built up on the dash like you see some drivers do. Make sure that there's no illegal stickers on the windshield. Move down from there, we'll move down this side and we'll check our heater to make sure that the heater works and the defroster works. From there, we'll move down to the emergency equipment. Make sure that the emergency equipment, your fire extinguisher, the 3 triangles in the orange box, and there's spare fuses. Unless your truck takes circuit breakers, then you don't need the spare fuses. But make sure that your fire extinguisher is charged, that it's rated for the vehicle, and that it's secured. And last but not least, like I said, make sure there are 3 triangles in that box. Next, what we're going to do is turn the key on, and we're going to make sure that all of our dash lights are working. We're going to make sure that the left signal indicator works, the right signal indicator works. We're going to make sure that the 4-ways work, and that the headlights, the bright and the dims, the bright indicator works in the dash, and that there's no warning lights after we start the vehicle. There will be no warning lights. I'm going to start the vehicle using a safety start. Safety start meaning it's in neutral, you're in the seat, you're in neutral. I said in the seat due to a lot of guys starting the truck out on the running board. There's lots of accidents on record due to guys doing that. So make sure you're in the seat, clutch is in, it's in neutral, and you start the engine. Immediately we're checking the gauges to make sure that the oil pressure is in the operational range, the water temperature is in the operational range or building. Make sure that the amp or voltmeter is working, making sure that the air pressure is building to the operational range or is at the operational range. Going to make sure that the ABS light came on and then came off again the way that it's supposed to. Next, we're going to check to make sure that the steering wheel is not excessively worn. We're going to turn the steering wheel, and you can have no more than 10 degrees of play or 2 inches on a 20-inch wheel. For this, you need to turn the steering wheel until you look out and see that there's movement with the steering tire. So I'll move it. And I saw movement on the tire down below. Now I'll move the steering wheel back the other way to see when the tire responds with a turn back the other way. And we have about 1 inch of play. About 1 inch of play. So we're good with our steering. Next, let's move to the air supply. We're going to check the air supply, and this is probably the least understood and the most ignored safety check of the vehicle. But you have to do it. It's a huge danger item if it's not operational. And with a CDL test, it's an automatic failure if you miss any part of this. So with the engine off, in Washington State, this is how it's required to be done. Engine off, it's in neutral. In this case, since we don't have a trailer hooked to the tractor, or truck in this case, we're just going to check the air supply in the tractor. If we did have a trailer, we would push both knobs in, adding air to the tractor and the trailer. But in this case, we're just going to release the brakes by adding air. Now we just charged up our tanks, we charged up our suspension. Have to turn the key on for the gauges to work in this truck. Now that the air is equalized out, we'll do a brake application of about 90 pounds. And we hold it for 1 minute. If you were testing for a CDL, you would want to use your clock or the stopwatch or your phone with a stopwatch. Make sure it's a full 60 seconds. If you're doing it by hand like what I'm doing, it's simple. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, all the way so on and so forth up to 60 seconds. If you had a trailer attached, you cannot lose more than 4 psi in 1 minute. With just the tractor by itself, you can't lose, or a Class B truck, you can't lose any more than 3 psi in 1 minute. And I'm watching our air gauges. It equalized out at about 110 pounds. It's been a full 60 seconds and we haven't lost more than 4 psi in 1 minute. Next, I'm going to check to make sure that the low air warning works. You do that by pumping it down and see where the buzzer or the light comes on. It has to be at 60 pounds or above. And it just came on at 65. We are legal. Next, I'm going to pump it down to make sure that the emergency brakes activate in between 20 and 45 pounds. In this case, just the yellow knob is going to pop out. If we had the trailer on the back, the tractor protection valve would activate the trailer air supply valve, and that would pop out in between 20 and 45. Like I said, in this case, it's just the yellow knob that's going to pop out because it's just the tractor only. And it popped out. We are at 30 PSI. We're legal. In case we ever lost our brakes, that would pop out. Next, we'll do a safety start. And we'll start the truck to make sure that the air governor cuts out. The air governor needs to cut out in between 100 and 125, or if it's higher, it needs to cut out where the manufacturer set the specifications for that to happen. We'll use a high idle for this example. Just about all the trucks now have air dryers. You'll see it and you'll hear it when the air governor cuts out. Number one, the gauge will quit climbing. And then number two, at that point when the air governor cuts out is when the air dryer makes its famous psh. And that's when the air governor cut out. So we'll see where that happens. Next, let's check the seat belt while we're waiting for the air pressure to build. Make sure that it's not ripped, it's not torn, there's no holes in it, and it's secured in the buckle, and the belt is secured to the floor. From the seat to the floor, it's secured. The belt, some believe to wear it, some believe not to wear it. The statistics show that there's more lives saved with the belt than without. And number two, it's the law. We're almost up to the cutout point where the air governor cuts off. And we will hear the psh. Anytime. There it happened. And it cut out at 135, exactly where the manufacturer specified for this system to cut out. And that concludes our pre-trip or post-trip inspection. Thank you very much. Drive safe.